What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Celtics Talk podcast here on the NBC Sports Boston podcast network. And yes, every time I think I'm done bugging ESPN's Nick Friedell, well, lo and behold, the Celtics and Nets are forever intertwined. And that's where we start, where on a sleepy late July day, Nick, your colleague, Adrian Wojnarowski, reports the Celtics and Nets have had some talks about a potential Jaylen Brown, Kevin Durant swaparoo. So let's just start 10,000 foot view. What was your thoughts when you heard this news?
If I'm Brad Stevens, I make this trade.
Oh, Nick. All right. Well, that's it for this edition of the Celtics Talk. No, come on, man. Are you trying to come work in Boston? Like, what is this? No. Celtics.
I want you to have somebody to go through the Worcester airport with at 6 in the morning. You know,
true.
I just, when I first saw it, I went, if you're Brad Stevens, seeing what you and I just saw in Miami, and then you saw it up close in San Francisco, Kevin is unbelievable still. And so if it's me, and I know Brooklyn's going to want everything as they should, because Kevin, for my money, Mr. Forsberg is the second best player in the league right now, right behind Giannis. I find a way, if you can, without gutting all the depth that was so important to the run that the Celtics just made, I find a way to do it. So it's a fascinating conversation. It's going to be really interesting to see the back and forth. As we sit here right now, I would still think that this is going to drag on for a while.
Oh, for sure.
A long while, especially since a lot of the league is going on vacation right now. But my initial thought when I saw it at 2:30 in the morning and that Woj tweet popped up was, okay, Brad, let's make this thing happen if you can.
My first reaction was, thank God I went to bed at like 1:30, because it would have ruined a very nice night's sleep. But like, honestly, my big takeaway was I'm always a little bit skeptical. So the Celtics don't typically make their business public, dating back to Danny Ainge, but especially in the Brad Stevens era. They have operated under a cloak of secrecy, and only when it's at the finish line do we tend to hear these things. So it's somewhat strange to me. So I'm not poo-pooing the reporting. Like, both Woj and Shams came out with their own reports and like very much in line with essentially Jaylen Brown being the potential centerpiece of this deal. What's hard for me to reconcile is that, like, the timing of it. So we know, and you know full well, this thing has, like, Kevin Durant was the big thing for 1 month. And now, not that Donovan Mitchell is dominating the headlines, but we're all sitting here going, when are these things going to start happening? And just as you just said, like, there seems to be no real movement, that this thing's probably going to drag out till training camp. And I'm not saying the Celtics won't be in on this process, but it's just weird to me, the timing. And if, for me, I'm sure Sean Marks wants to go on vacation. It's been a long year. So it's just unique to me that all of a sudden it's like, oh, Miami, Toronto, you're dragging your feet a little bit here. The Celtics have come with this offer of the best player, single available player. Am I wrong to think that this could be a little bit of a leverage play from the Brooklyn Nets?
There's always a reason stuff like this pops out. You and I have been in this business way too long to think that there's not somebody back there, whether it's in Brooklyn, whether it's in Kevin's inner circle. This is part of the deal. You just wonder who wanted to push it. You don't think that the Celtics did, because what does it benefit them to potentially upset Jaylen Brown? That was one of my other first thoughts, Chris, was, what is Jaylen going to think about all this? And then we saw the tweet, and here we go, a whole nother 24, 48 hours of speculation on all this stuff. So it's a very fair assessment of, okay, why now? Especially since, by all accounts, for the time being, it doesn't feel like anything is anywhere close. When did these conversations take place? These are all conversations that people are having and wondering about. But on top of what Woj put out there initially, the most interesting part to me about the story that kind of got lost in the shuffle was Durant hasn't backed off wanting to get out of there, because that as I followed that Nets team in the last 6 months after switching from the Warriors, and I started to see these the initial reports pop out, you kind of go, all right, well, would he come back? If the Nets said, hey, Kevin, we're going to still try to move you if you want to get traded, but everything in that organization revolves around him. There was a whole lot of layers to why it didn't work and all the issues behind the scenes with Kyrie and his decision not to get vaccinated. But at the heart of it is, would Durant actually come back to start next year, or is he still trying to push really hard to get out? And that's the line to me, on top of, all right, Jaylen Brown, the Celtics, it was that Durant has shown no signs of pulling back on that. And if you're trying to read into all this stuff, the feel I got was, okay, well, maybe he is back there saying, get me out of here and get me out of here before training camp and the new season and all of the different things that would pop up from there.
Yeah, and I think everyone just has a motivation to, if you're unhappy and you want to know where you're going next, you don't want this to fester for 2 months and then find out a month before training camp, a week before training camp. So I get all the different motivations. Let's take the news at face value that the Celtics and Nets have had conversations, which I 100% believe happened, because you are not doing your due diligence as an NBA GM if you do not call the Brooklyn Nets and say, oh, one of the top 10 players in NBA history is available. I know he's going to be 34, but let's talk about it. What is the price? And especially as potential suitors fall off, like if Phoenix can't put together an attractive deal, I can understand like a team like the Celtics saying, okay, maybe the price point's reasonable enough and it's still going to be painful, but like, can we get in with the best available asset? How much do you think the Nets would be intrigued by a package headlined by Jaylen Brown, and let's say they want Marcus Smart and draft picks? Is that enough considering the ransom that already like Rudy Gobert went for it? Or do the Celtics still have to come to the table with much more than what we've initially heard?
Well, let's start with this bedrock. Nothing's enough.
Yeah.
Kevin Durant is that good. And I really like Jaylen Brown. I've seen him develop through the years like you have. I think his better days are certainly ahead of him still. He's not Kevin Durant. There isn't any other Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is an incredible player. Even now, heading towards 34 with 4 years left on the deal. So no, nothing Brooklyn gets back is going to be enough. But in the context of the Gobert deal and all the other superstar trades that we've seen, and to be clear, Rudy Gobert is not a superstar. But I mean,
thank you.
In the last few years, what we've seen, Boston's got to come up with a whole bunch of different stuff. And if it's Jaylen and Marcus Smart and who knows what else contract-wise to make it all work. But Chris,
don't you dare say Robert Williams. I'm just throwing that out there.
The Time Lord. Oh man, all these moments of that Miami series are coming back.
Yeah, there you go.
But to me, it's the picks, because if you're Brooklyn, yes, you want, in this case, a young, really good player who could turn into a really big star through time. You want another couple really solid players, but you want every pick that is possible, and you want some swaps, and you want it all. So on paper, given what we've seen, I mean, let's just go through it quickly. Phoenix, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and picks. I mean, that doesn't seem that appealing to me. Miami, the Bam stuff with Ben Simmons and how their contracts it can't be moved. That's interesting, but it doesn't seem like Miami would want to move Bam anyway. So if you're Brooklyn, okay. Toronto, would they include Barnes? If not, that's going nowhere. And New Orleans, that had some I don't know, push behind it to start, but I don't see them being able, or at least having the desire to potentially move Zion or whatever other young pieces would work. So if you're Boston on paper right now, as we sit here at the end of July with probably at least 2 more months of this coming our way, Boston has the pieces. Boston has the fit. And before we go any farther on any of this, Mr. Forsberg, the key to me, and I say this as somebody who respects the hell out of what Boston did and picked the Celtics to beat the Bucks, to me on paper, Milwaukee's the best team in the East, because Milwaukee gets Middleton back and Holiday has a summer to rest and recover because they went straight to the Olympics, and they still have Giannis. So in the pecking order of all this stuff, maybe part of the thinking for Brad Stevens is, if you're the Celtics, hey, we had a hell of a year. We probably should have won the finals if we didn't turn the ball over all over the place in that series. But are we really, if we're being honest with ourselves, the best team in the East right now? To me, that's still Milwaukee, and I think that's part of the calculus here.
It's interesting. Like, one of the things I heard a lot in Vegas, and I've repeated it on air here, has been that people said if the Celtics had Malcolm Brogdon and Danilo Gallinari on their roster 3 weeks ago, or a month now, whatever it is, they probably win the finals. So you feel pretty good about coming into the year that you're maybe not on Milwaukee's level just because of how good Giannis is, but you're close. And even with the return of Middleton, and you did beat that team. So I think you should feel a little bit of swagger, at least going into the year. But it's absolutely fair to sit there and say, if the East is loaded up, if there are teams out there that it's just not probably going to be, and I hate to call it easy, because there was nothing easy about the Celtics playoff run. But if it is going to be daunting again, and maybe even more daunting than what you saw, despite the list of teams you had to go through, I get the suggestion that you need to load up, you need to go get a Kevin Durant, and certainly when he's available. I think the biggest thing at play, that the biggest unknown to me from a Celtics perspective, is what is Jaylen Brown's commitment level to this team beyond the 2 years remaining on his contract. My gut tells me that Brad Stevens knows better than us, but sometimes you never know. Like, even when Kyrie was going through it and was like openly pretty much saying, like, look, I'm out of here in 2019. Some in that like organization, and definitely some of us on the outside, were like, there's always the chance he comes back, like that he has a change of heart. So they have to know in their mind, or have a feeling about Jaylen Brown. You've been around players a long time. Do you think Jaylen, based on what you see, based on what just the history of players across the league, can he be okay being the 1B to Jason Tatum's 1A? Do you think there might come a point where he wants to be that focal point? Is Brooklyn a situation where he could be 1A?
He could be that guy, assuming that Kevin gets moved, Kyrie, who knows what's going to happen with that whole scene. But I'd say this, whether Kyrie shows up next season and is a member of the Nets, I don't think his long-term future is in Brooklyn. I think we can all agree on that. So the opportunity would be there. I would defer to you as far as having watched Jaylen Brown from the beginning, what you think about how he would feel the need to have that role as the main guy or the top guy. But I'd also say this, Chris, if you're the Celtics, not only does Brad Stevens absolutely have at least a really strong lead and feel for that, if you're Jaylen Brown and they say, hey, Jaylen, you're our guy, we're going to pay you just like every other top star there is, then if you're Jaylen Brown and you're comfortable in Boston and you like the framework of the team and the city, you shouldn't have to mess with it too much, because for so many guys, as we know in the league, show me the money. And so if they're going to commit to him financially as they start to have these conversations about all the different options in the future, that part is important. But again, to me, he is a very, very good player who is going to get better than what we've seen. But that other guy is Kevin Durant. And what I would bounce back to you is, if you're the Celtics, can you make the deal without including Smart? Is there some way that this deal becomes more palatable? Not that Marcus Smart by any stretch is untradeable, but you and I watched how important he was defensively for what they did. So if it's Jaylen Brown, every pick and pick swap and Derek whatever.
So I think that's why that's why I think, I don't know if people are kind of throwing darts but it does make a lot of sense. They just signed Malcolm Brogdon. They do have some more depth at the guard position. Not that Derek White is going to be squeezed, because I think based on Brogdon's injury history, combined with like the Celtics just utter need for depth and ability to play at multiple positions, I think there's going to be a robust role for all three players next year. But, you know, Peyton Pritchard's on the outside looking in right now. They do have other means to fill minutes if needed. I would say there is a way to make this deal, and part of it might be coming down to, if there's just no other offer out there that is as attractive as Boston's, at least based on the centerpiece of Jaylen and picks, then the Nets have to consider that more. Maybe that's just the line the Celtics draw. The one thing I just can't get past, and you know what, like every time I've heard Scal try to talk me into it. Every night on our programs here, someone's trying to talk me into this deal, and everyone's like, "Why are you so hesitant?" It's Kevin Durant, and I totally get that point. But it's also Kevin Durant at 34, who is now kind of got sick and tired of two different situations, who undeniably makes you a championship contender immediately. But my fear is, unless you're LeBron James and you're a cyborg, what happens in 2 years? And what happens if for whatever reason you don't win a title in those 2 years? And what happens if you're watching Jaylen Brown continue to evolve from a top 25 player to a top 20 player to whatever he ends up being? And you know, in your back of your mind, you could have had potentially 6-8 years of Jaylen and Jason as the core, with Marcus Smart there, with Robert Williams developing, with like Brad still making bold moves to fill out this roster. The volatility scares me a little bit. And maybe ultimately that's like, someone should slap me and say, Forsberg, it's Kevin Durant. And multiple people have done that. And I can't shake this just like pit in my stomach that says, it's maybe a little bit safer. And at least from like, when I kind of peel back the layers and take it from a fan perspective, it should be more enjoyable if the two guys you drafted, the two guys you invested in, and the two guys you built this all around ultimately deliver you to that finish line. And there's no guarantee that's going to happen based on the talent in the league. But damn, it would be fun to watch, especially after they've took that next step this year and we're knocking on the door.
I'd frame it to you in this context. It really boils down to Brad Stevens and his staff, because Brad, having coached him, is uniquely qualified to say, all right, I believe that Jaylen Brown can become this through the years. Kevin Durant is an all-time great. He is one of the very best players I have ever seen in my life. My point back to you would be, if Kevin Durant, if they make the move a couple months from now and the Celtics win, nobody's going to care if he's hurt in 2 years. It's not going to matter. They made the move. They swung for the fences. It all worked, and everybody will be happy. So I understand the feeling of, well, Jaylen Brown still has a lot left in his career, and he's got a lot of room for growth and how much better he can be. So what I would say is, how much does everybody trust Brad Stevens? And I know that trust has been built up for a long time out there. And you and I have gone through this for several years. I'm still in shock that Brad's not coach in that group. But he proved himself. He was great. But
he might be a better GM than he was a coach, which is like,
I mean, we're gonna see here. But
it's just crazy to say.
I know it. But the key is Brad knows. And so if you're a Celtics fan, the question you ask yourself is, just how much do we trust Brad? Having been around that organization and in that city plenty the last few years, I know the answer is a lot. But Forsberg, it's Kevin freaking Durant.
This is how every episode of our programming ends.
That is the part that I don't think people are remembering in all this. He is that good. Yeah. He's had health issues the last few years. I understand the trepidation there, but he's still that good. And the only team I've ever seen to knock him off physically, defensively, was the Celtics in that first round series that you and I watched.
So I guess that's the one, like, maybe I'm just letting a recency bias, like that he couldn't figure out a way at 33 to kind of will his team, even though those series was, considering his supporting cast, was as close as it could have been. So let's end on that. Tell me, you were around him there at the end of the year. He's still got it. You're confident he can be at that level for another couple of years moving forward.
100%. 100%. He's that dynamic of a player. Now, any player who's going to be 34 years old, there are health questions, anybody, when you go through that. But I think Kevin was really frustrated with how that season played out and ended. To me, he's going to come back very motivated into next season. And again, if we're ending it on where this all may go, I look at Boston as a hell of a team going into next year, but I do not put them past Milwaukee. If you had Kevin Durant to go against Giannis in a potential series, first of all, sign me up. I mean, you and I will be loving that whole thing, but that is what you need. And can Jaylen Brown, nobody's saying that Jaylen Brown has to go be an all-time great, but how much better can he develop into? To me, having watched Jaylen, I'm rolling the dice with Kevin Durant, and I'll live with whatever the consequences may be.
I don't know. I guess I've planted my flag on Team Jaylen. So I'm just going to sit here and SMH. I'm going to shake my head, just like Jaylen tweeted. I'm going to shake my head at all of you. And we'll see where it goes from here. Celtics don't come out and usually shoot down misinformation and trade rumors. I'd be surprised if that happens. So you know what? We're just going to keep talking about this for 2 months. Another SMH moment was me having to hear Cedric Maxwell give the same Friedell speech tonight, telling me that it's Kevin Durant. So we're going to end on this. I need everybody to like, subscribe, check us out on the YouTube page. But here's a clip from early edition. Cedric Maxwell making me feel guilty. And then Shams drops by to talk about his reporting on the subject as well. I'll be over here shaking my head, and we'll catch you next time on the Celtics Talk podcast.
Well, let me jump off the fence, and this is what I'll say. And Forsberg, I'll throw this one at you. If you have Kevin Durant, and last year your problem was you couldn't score in the finals, would you have won the championship if you had Kevin Durant on that team with Jaylen Brown versus Golden State? And I think that answers my question, and that's why I'll get off the fence and say, yes, I would make the trade. As much as I love Jaylen Brown, but Red Auerbach said it better than we could all say it: never fall in love with the product, and always be willing to make changes to improve your basketball club. So I think I'm off the fence now, and yeah, if push came to shove, I would do it. But I wouldn't give the entire bank for him. It would be a suspect with giving up some players, but not the whole bank.
I have a smug face on right now.
Yeah.
I just feel so vindicated. Go ahead, Chris Forsberg. You actually hate this, and you think it's all a bunch of BS, right? Like, you don't even think that all of these rumors have much to them at all.
So I've covered this team for going on, 12, 13 years now. And every trade during the Danny Ainge era, and most of the trades, certainly all the trades during the Brad Stevens era, have sort of come out of left field. There's no sense. The Celtics do not make their business public. They don't find it good, because it can hurt feelings with players on your rosters, and it can compromise deals that are in the process to being made. And I find it somewhat suspect that at 2:30 in a late July night, as the Brooklyn Nets are sitting there twiddling their thumbs and waiting for someone to come with an offer, all of a sudden, the Boston Celtics are in the mix. And I'm just saying, I do think the Celtics have had conversations. I'm not dismissing any of the reporting. What I'm telling you is that Brooklyn has way more motivation in this situation than the Boston Celtics do to have this news out there and spur on other teams to make a deal. The Celtics certainly have to stay involved, especially as suitors fall off the board, because if you can get Kevin Durant for a discount, you do that. But the Celtics are not getting Kevin Durant for a discount, and so I will continue to sit here and shake my head.
Man, I just don't. Again, Forsberg, I was in love with Al Jefferson. Absolutely loved him. How do you get rid of Al Jefferson when you think about going over and getting the big ticket? You can't do that because he's an older player. At the end of the day, it made business sense, and they won the championship. Here's the other thing I'll say, though. Trini, you did say something about Jaylen Brown having a wandering eye. Well, what kind of eyes did Durant have? I mean, he's wandering all over the place. So it's part of that. What you're saying doesn't hold water.
All right, let's deep dive this topic with a guy himself who was breaking all the details. Shams, thanks for joining us. You heard, Brad Stevens, and I'm sure you saw that sound or heard it before. He doesn't want to break up the chemistry of this group. But now, even if they don't make this trade, it is out there that they were looking at Kevin Durant. So what is the latest in trade talks between the Brooklyn Nets and the Boston Celtics?
So for Boston, it's been pretty slow developing when it comes to the Kevin Durant sweepstakes. At the outset of Kevin Durant's trade request on June 30th, you had teams like the Suns, the Heat, the Raptors really emerge at the forefront. But throughout those conversations, there really hasn't been a deal that makes sense for the Nets. They've set a very high price threshold for a Kevin Durant trade. So this is one of the best players in the world today, a guy that's a two-time champion, a guy that's won 2 NBA championships, arguably, will be a Hall of Famer. And so there's obviously a high asking price that the Nets have set. And so far, no one has really met it. And I think over the last couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, you've seen, I've heard the Celtics have emerged as a real threat, and they have the pieces potentially to put together a deal. And I don't think that this is something that's going to be imminent. Deal could take some time to develop if there's a deal at all. But right now, the sides aren't really necessarily close. There is a deal here to be had, but right now the Celtics are not as inclined to trade a guy like Marcus Smart along with draft picks with a guy like Jaylen Brown. In their mind, if you're going to be trading multiple key rotation players to go get Kevin Durant, does that really take you to that next level? These are all questions that Brad Stevens, that front office, will have to analyze. And any front office that has the pieces that Boston has, that has the flexibility they have to see what's out there. And Kevin Durant is a guy that any team would want to see if they can acquire.
I do find it odd that the Celtics have emerged as a serious threat in terms of acquiring Kevin Durant when we just heard, Brad Stevens at the top of the block talk about the fact that, it's a very delicate situation, the chemistry of this team and how close they've gotten to an NBA title this past season. But Shams, the one thing I found interesting was the inclusion of Marcus Smart. How much of an immovable object is Marcus Smart in this situation when it comes to the Celtics pursuing Kevin Durant?
He's obviously a defensive player of the year on the floor. He means a lot to them there, but especially off the court, the culture and leadership that Marcus Smart has brought. I think it goes beyond stats. You can't really put a numerical value on what he brings to the table. So there's no question. They want Marcus Smart to be the starting point guard. The Celtics do on a team that potentially has Kevin Durant. You want to have Marcus Smart, Kevin Durant, Jason Tatum, Robert Williams, Al Horford, the guys that they have, the depth that they have. You want to have Marcus Smart on that team. But if Brooklyn is dead set on getting Marcus Smart in any type of a potential package with Jaylen Brown, as well as draft picks and potentially another player, clearly the price is set. And so if there's not going to be movement from Brooklyn side as far as acquiescing and lowering maybe their ask, or Boston coming up and saying, we can't miss out on Kevin Durant, he changes the game for us. There very well could not or might not be a deal, but there is a framework of something here. But which side ultimately ends up deciding that they want to give a little bit more than they might right now, we'll see what happens. But listen, there's 2 months before the start of training camp. That's basically the unofficial trade deadline right now of the offseason.
Shams, you talked about the fact that the Celtics are probably in the best position with the best pieces to offer Brooklyn a competitive package. But is there any other team that could give the Celtics a run for their money and go after Kevin Durant and actually land him?
Right now, I would really look at Toronto and Miami, but Toronto without Scotty Barnes in the deal, and I'm told that is not a player that they want to move or have shown any desire to move in even a deal for Kevin Durant. So, you have them and that package of, different guys that you can put together on that roster, whether it be Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby. It would appear to be less appealing than what the Celtics could provide. I mean, this is a team that just went to the NBA Finals. It's tried, it's proven. It's a young core that's grown year after year. And on the other side in Miami, they do have a guy in Bam Adebayo that would be tremendously valuable to the Brooklyn Nets. But because of Ben Simmons being on the roster, having 2 max rookie extension guys, they're not able to have both of them on the roster. So that deal just becomes tricky. And from Miami's standpoint, do you want to have do you want to bring in Kevin Durant and you don't have Bam Adebayo? That somewhat defeats the purpose of taking you to that next level. as far as competing for a championship. So there's not really a clear path to a deal for Kevin Durant right now. So when you look at the marketplace, the Celtics have the pieces. They probably right now have the best deal on the board, but it's not a deal that Brooklyn is willing to do at this moment.
You mentioned that unofficial trade deadline for September for when these talks could really be coming to a close for Kevin Durant. But I want to take it back. When did the Celtics really kind of get into this conversation? Was it initially when Kevin Durant became, said he wanted to be a free agent, was asking for a trade out of Brooklyn? Or is this something that simmered over time once, the Celtics got to notice that, hey, maybe these other teams, they don't have what we have to offer for a player like KD?
As soon as Kevin Durant asked out on the eve of free agency on June 30th, all 29 teams reached out to the Brooklyn Nets and expressed a level of interest. And that included the Celtics. Every team in the league did. Anytime a player like Kevin Durant gets on the market, you do your due diligence, you analyze, does that player make sense? And you express a level of interest. But talks didn't really pick up any type of esteem or really offers given by either side until really the last 2 or 3 weeks. And that's really the point, really in the last week and a half, when there was, some semblance of a conversation, of a framework, of something that could be potentially possible. But throughout this month, it's not like the Celtics were a team that's been going back and forth. There really hasn't been much back and forth because at this point, the Celtics have, made an offer. The Nets are where they are at. And we'll see over these next 2 months, as the unofficial trade deadline of the offseason looms closer and closer.
Shams, with Jaylen Brown's name being sort of, officially brought up in these talks, there are sort of conflicting ideas of whether or not Brown is happy in Boston. We've heard about him liking tweets where he's being unfairly treated here. But then we also see today from a local reporter, and Mark Murphy, saying, no, Jaylen Brown loves Boston. What are you hearing about Jaylen Brown and him wanting to be a Boston Celtic for the long run?
I don't have any clarity on either which way. Obviously he's under contract with the Celtics for 2 more years, and I haven't heard anything about any type of displeasure that he's had with the organization. Overall over these last 2-3 years, I think you've seen a lot of growth in the organization when it comes to Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart. Just a couple of years ago in the bubble, they had some very testy moments. So for them to go from that to being a couple wins away from an NBA Finals championship, I think speaks a lot to the growth of the organization. But I think overall, this is a team that I think has grown a lot, has a lot more growth potentially to do. But I haven't heard of any significant displeasure from Jaylen Brown, any type of request or anything like that from his side as of right now.
Everyone here in Boston has seen the picture of Jaylen Brown and Kyrie Irving and Kanye West, and people cannot stop talking about it here in Boston. But Shams, just maybe how much does Kyrie play into maybe luring Jaylen Brown away from Boston, maybe to Brooklyn? Does he play any part in that at all?
Kyrie Irving is on an expiring contract. I think he's just focused on playing out the season, and he's really, there's not really a leverage position right now. He's not there's not a trade request or anything like that. He's finishing, his contract out, and that means right now he's going to be a Brooklyn Net, and so he I don't think anyone really has the power in Brooklyn to try to go get Jaylen Brown or recruit him as of right now.
All right, Shams Charania, thank you so much, the senior NBA insider for both The Athletic and Stadium. We appreciate your insight. Thank you very much.